All right.
We're taking all the best old school wisdom and blending it with the top new school methods to bring you the optimal coaching strategies. This is the 80-20 Baseball Podcast with Coach Bo.
Welcome back, everybody. Coach Bo here with you. I hope your year is off to a fantastic start. I have a feeling this is going to be a fantastic year for all of us. And now that we're into the new year, for some of you, the baseball season is not that far away. For others, it's still a ways away, but the preparation for the season may not be too far away. And the purpose of this podcast is to continue each week checking in 30 minutes-ish to build up, to fine-tune our coaching game and continue taking it to the next level. With that said, we're going to dive right into part 2 of our interview with the author and coach JP NERBUN and get a better understanding of how we can be successful as coaches, connecting with players, building a great team culture, connecting with the parents of our players. While winning games has a temporary element of fun, it's usually short-lived, but having a great team culture, cohesiveness, the camaraderie between the players, the coaches, the parents, having that dialed in, having that solidified and strong and healthy, that will make the season such a better experience from start to finish. Not only that, it will make the experience something that lasts for a lifetime for many of the players, if not all of them, leaving a positive impact for life, a positive experience that they will always remember. So let's dive in. Part 2. Here we go. I think the consistency of the consequence on the non-negotiables and the malleability with some of the lesser things. That's always been my message. Would you agree on that?
Yeah, there are a lot of things that get in the way for us as coaches when it comes to being consistently enforcing the standard. One is our fear of the player's response, our fear of the parent's response. I also think sometimes we try to treat fairly, but we're not always treating everyone the same because, I got a lot of coaches, they got a couple kids and they come from really tough situations, broken homes. And it's like, hey, I'm meeting that player where they're at. And, over here, player, B, their character might be stronger, their work ethic might be stronger, and I'm meeting there and I'm stretching him and challenging that individual. And so it's really about identifying the players. So I think sometimes the hard thing is like the perception of what players, and maybe that was what Seth Davis was getting at with Wooded. But I think one of the people that I really actually appreciate the most in coaching and college coaching today is an ice hockey coach named Eric Lang. I think Eric Lang at American International College, he took the worst Division I college hockey team to one of the best in like 3-4 years. But he just talks about how around discipline, sometimes when we are holding individuals accountable, we don't talk about it as a team and they go, this is a private matter. There's a lot of things that they do affect the team. And we're going to have a family environment where we're going to talk about things like, hey, we asked Johnny to step off yesterday because his attitude wasn't right. Or, so-and-so was late to practice yesterday and this was the consequence. But this was the situation, right? And it was a different situation than player B who was late to practice today just because he overslept. There's different situations. So it's just having that open dialogue helps to build trust as well as help athletes understand that, you're trying to be consistent, but you're also trying to treat every situation with its own context. You're trying to be appreciative of that.
What a great point. We use the term background and past, but I like story. And there's so many nuances to everybody's story. So knowing that, and I like your balanced take on things. You're talking about both sides and the pros and the cons of things. Something that came to mind there was having the same consequences. You tell me what you think about this. Having the same consequences is important, but having different conversations. I believe in a tiered consequence system, especially for youth sports. Have a tiered consequence system, but then have the same consequences based off of when the players mess up and make that same mistake. Here's the consequence. And that's the same for each player, for each tier on that system. On the flip side, we should have different conversations with our players. So if a player comes from a different background, the conversation will be different. The rapport building will be different. But the consequences for our non-negotiables, I don't think should change. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I do. I think when it comes to like the standard being the standard, that doesn't necessarily move. What I've seen in some circumstances is somehow how we work through that situation. There's some tiering. Like I'll just give a few really practical examples. So my non-negotiables are be on time, listen, and don't complain. Okay, now that might change, like if I'm coaching like under 10s, right? Like I'm coaching under 8s, my daughter's team in the moment, and being on time is not in the control of the 8-year-old. So I focus on other things, but just for being on time as a high school coach, if you had a reason why you were late, we went with a restorative consequence. It's like, hey, you still need to do the pre-practice routine. And then after practice, if you missed something, you had to get with the coach to make that up. Actually, maybe you missed some install on some plays, or maybe you missed some shooting. If you were 30 minutes late to practice, we were going to try to get you 30 minutes in the next day or that after practice if possible. We're just trying to always say, hey, you missed something, you got to make it up. That's the reality of life. You miss school, the consequence is you got makeup work, right? You got to get through that. And so we try to always do that. If you miss practice or you're late to practice, you haven't communicated and you don't have a good reason, right? Our standard was you just didn't practice. That was it. We had that as a firm standard. Other coaches I work with, they might say, hey, you're late. You're going to sit out a part of practice and you're still to make it work. But like whatever it is, you have it, you just go and you enforce it. The player, if they're not listening, I might just pause, wait for them. If I have to pause multiple times in a practice, I might just say, hey, you know what? Step off. All right. We'll see you in the next drill, right? Because you're just struggling with that focus. So I've got like a progression into how I enforce those consequences. One of my standards was like, say, not to compete. Right. And they're not competing. They're not going hard in that drill. It might be first one is like, hey, do that rep again, or we're going to reset that drill. We're going to go back to the start and we're going to go from the beginning. So progression 1 is do it again. Progression 2, I might say, you know what? We're struggling to get the effort right. You go step off and go figure things out and come back when you're ready to, so you have that progression. I think so often coaches don't have that progression and we don't hold them accountable. And all of a sudden it's like, get out of practice, like in this ball where we explode, we blow up, we put them on the line, we run them, And so it's just knowing a little bit of our progression of those consequences so we can enforce that is just really important.
So having a line in the sand, but just don't have that line right up tight against the players, give them a little slack and adjust from there. What do you think about using an approach with players when, say, they're not listening, like you mentioned? So they're not listening to you, or you notice they're not paying attention. They're looking around and distracted when you're talking to them. I think one of the best things to do for this is just keep those discussions short. In fact, that's something I got from Coach John Wooden years ago, probably 15 years ago. I was reading a book. One thing that stood out the most was he kept all his conversations and talks really short. He got to the point, he was concise because he didn't want to dilute. He wanted his players to know that when he started speaking, he was going to get to his point and he was going to get there quickly, and they weren't going to have to be listening for 20 minutes and then extract and try to figure out what he was saying. So I thought that was something that was good. What about when you have a player that's not listening, or some players that aren't listening? There's the golden rule. And from that, getting them to to build some empathy and sympathy. I've used this tactic as a teacher. I worked inner city for 12 years, and most of my kids were in gangs or rehab or other tough situations. I mean, it was high school, 9th through 12th grade. It was inner city, Compton, Watts, Long Beach, Paramount. It was a tough area, and this worked even with them. If I noticed a kid wasn't listening in class, first off, I never put them on blast because I thought that was not the way, that was definitely going to backfire. But I would just take note, okay, they did this twice, or they did this a third time, usually not on the first time. And then I would just have a little list on my desk of those students that weren't paying attention 2 or 3 different times over the recent. And then when they would come up to a student would come up to me, I would have it on my clipboard if we were outside doing something, or on my desk, and I would just have a little Post-it. If the student's name was on the list and they came up, Mr. A, I would actually ignore them. And they go, hey man, what's going on? What are you doing? I said, now let me ask you this. I don't like doing this. It really hurts me because I care for you. But how does that feel when I'm not listening to you? How does that feel inside? That's not fun. And I go, that's the feeling I get when I see you sitting over there talking to so-and-so, or when I see you not listening to me. I get that same feeling. What do you think about using that method? It seems like it's worked pretty good because they feel it. Like they viscerally feel that, we want them to be intrinsically motivated. They really feel empathy and sympathy. And these were some hardcore kids that were really hardened on the outside, and it worked well with them. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I got kind of 2 thoughts. I mean, I really like it. I think it's similar. My approach, as a teacher for a while as well too, and similar to how I do it in coaching as a teacher, I would just say to a guy like, wasn't strong enough focus, like, hey man, I just lean right in and be like, I want you to stay after class and let's just have a conversation, right? And then I would just kind of say, hey, you're really struggling with focus. What's going on? What can we do to help? And we'd come up with proactive solutions, and we'd call these like what I call them in my book, intentional interventions, which intentional interventions are really something we've agreed upon to help them to reset themselves. So what this looks like in the classroom was I had one kid who was like ADHD. I was ADHD as a kid. I'm like, man, sitting at a desk for 7 hours is painful. I understood that. So I would just give him a look and he'd go take a lap around around the building. Like he would literally just go run around the building. And I just had a little look that I would give him and he knew it. It was like, hey, you need it? Yeah, all good. He'd go do his lap. I had a youth soccer coach that had a kid that really struggled with focus and practice. He had a conversation like that. And I think it was, I touched his nose 3 times. And that was just a agreed upon little intervention to remind that guy, like, hey, I see you, I pay attention. Because what that coach had with the 7-year-old was like, you're being really silly and goofy. And I think it's because you want my attention, right? He's like, yeah, absolutely. So it's just like, I do 3 touches on my nose. I'm just like, I'm seeing you, but let's make sure we're not being distraction of other people. Phil Jackson had an intentional intervention with Tony Kukoc, with the Chicago Bulls. He had a little hand signal when Kukoc would start to check out of the game. He would have a little hand signal that would help Kukoc to reset. So you've got at all different levels you can use some of these intentional interventions. But the thing that you're talking about there is this question. It's such a powerful question. It's just, well, what would that feel like for you? What does that feel like for you? Or how would that feel if someone was to do that to you? So anytime we ask a question where we help them to put themselves in our shoes or somebody else's shoes, that question, if it's truly with curiosity, we're challenging them to think, reflect, actually activates a part of the brain called the temporal junction. The temporal junction is a part of the brain that is responsible for empathy. And it's the more that we access that part of the brain, the better we get at empathy. And so we actually, by asking empathetic questions or getting players to think empathetically, we're strengthening that muscle. And so I think what you were doing was really profound for those young people.
Strengthening the empathy muscle. I love it. That's interesting. Makes sense. That's a really interesting, take on that. All right, JP, let's dive into the next question. We've been kind of diving in and talking about some things here that are just super interesting, but I know we have some questions that I'd love to hear your thoughts on. And the next one is, what do you think are the 2 biggest mistakes youth coaches make, or just coaches in general, but more if you can specify for youth coaches? What are the 2 biggest mistakes that coaches make that damage a team culture? What are the 2 things that we should avoid? The 2 biggest mistakes or the 2 most common mistakes coaches make that damage team cultures?
Oh man, I want to give you 3. Like definitely one of the top is that we use a lot of like lecturing and fear-based approach, like coaching. We just get on our guys constantly and just are constantly telling them, and the players will tune us out. They'll disconnect with us in that regard. And so I think just the fear-based coaching is probably one of the most damaging things that we can do. Somewhat connected with that, I would say the second thing is that we're not self-aware, not self-reflective on ourselves as a coach. We walk out of a practice and we go, they weren't focused today. How do we fix them? They had bad attitudes today. How do we fix them? The energy was poor today. How do we fix them? It's all about them. And it's never like, well, how did I show up today? What was my energy? Like when the attitudes were low, did I make it worse? Like so often we just add fuel to the fire. Back to my first point, their energy is low. They're not having fun. Like I was talking to a coach this other day. He was reaching out because he was struggling with some stuff. He's like, these guys, they don't want to work hard. They don't have great attitudes. And I tell them like this and that. And then, like nothing, they don't change. I'm like, well, if someone has a bad attitude and say, you got a bad attitude, they don't go, okay, I got you. All right, I'll have a good attitude. Like it just doesn't work like that. And so we don't reflect on how we're operating, how we're showing up and work on ourselves. We have a growth mind. We try to have a growth mindset towards our players, their skill development, right? Their ability to swing a baseball bat, or their ability to throw a ball. But we also got to understand that few things when it comes to growth mindset. Their skill is not just limited to their ability to hit a baseball or throw a baseball. Skill is also character. And so a guy has a poor attitude, he's got poor work ethic, that can grow as well. But not only with them, we got to have a growth mindset towards ourselves, right? And so often it's just like we have a very fixed mindset and a very fixed identity. This is who I am. I'm not a very empathetic person, or I'm a really passionate, I'm an emotional coach. This is who I am, is what I used to say for years. And I got to have a growth mindset towards myself. It's like, yeah, I can be emotional. I am passionate, but I also have other aspects and other parts of my identity, my personality. And I can evolve these things. I can grow these things. I can become more compassionate, more empathetic, right? I can become more in control of my emotions, right? And so we have to have a growth mindset towards ourselves and be self-reflective is the second thing. And the third thing is at the youth level is we create walls and barriers, and we see parents as a problem, and it just creates more problems for us down the line. And I see that so often in youth coaching. It was for me, it's like, hey, you're the parent, you do your job as a parent. I'm going to do my job as a coach. Actually, by the way, I'm still going to be reflecting on how bad your parenting is, though, and complain to everybody else, on my staff or their coaches. But, it's just like we don't build partnerships. The reality is the parents have a better sense of their kid, a better understanding of their kid. Usually they're the most influential person in that kid's life. And so if we really want to influence our young people, then we need to go to the person that has the biggest influence on them, which is their parent. That's the same in anything in life. Like you want to influence somebody, one of the parts of the best ways to influence another person is to work with the people that have a lot of influence in that person's life.
Well, I appreciate you sharing those and having you discuss some of the, the bigger mistakes or the more common mistakes. It just goes and falls in line with the 80-20 principle. I know you have a lot longer list of things, mistakes coaches make, but I always like to start there. And I like how you said character is also a skill, and building character is building a skill. I really like how you said that. You got me thinking about last night, our daughter was acting a fool about something. Something was going on. She wasn't doing something. And I looked at my wife, having read all of Jocko Willink's books, right? Extreme Ownership and all those, and really buying into that kind of what you're saying is what his message is also. And of course, it really lines up and it's an amazing message. First, look at yourself, ownership as a coach or a leader. But I said to my wife, I said, hey, at that age, I said, kids, I said, very rarely is it a bad kid. And almost always, it's bad parenting. I think then from there, then you have to self-reflect and you have to look inward. Am I onto something there? Or
yeah, it's really tough. I do it as a parent too. I like how you bring parenting into it because the powerful thing is we become when we're transformational coach, we'll become a better parent, we'll become a leader in the classroom or wherever we're leading, right? That's what's so cool about some of my work with coaches is they're seeing in other areas of their life if they're a leader of a company or whatever, they grow in both areas. This is a hard thing. And so often the thing is that our children, they do something or our athletes, they do something that's unacceptable. And we have to hold them accountable to that, right? Yet we don't account often for their ability or their age. And so we have this disproportionate emotional response. And then we lose, I won't say we lose the high ground, but then the way that we respond just totally undoes our ability to impact and work with them on that. And so we come with some sort of fear-based response. And we yell at them, we get on them about it. It's like, to your point with your wife, we as parents, we have to work with them to grow at that. And so here's the thing though, people might listen to this be going, man, you're really hard on coaches. Like you got a really high standard for coaches. I'm like, yeah, I do because we have such an important role in these young people's lives and we have to be working on ourselves. We don't have to be perfect. None of us need to be perfect. The most powerful experience for me and my athletes was when I started really truly working on myself and working on my temper and how I respond emotionally, was I started to share that with them. I said, I'm working at this. I'm not going to be great at it today or tomorrow, but I just know that I'm working at it. And you guys can give me feedback. You guys can support me and help me. That was profound because when my athletes saw that I was working on myself, they were more willing to work on themselves. Same with my kids. I have conversations with my kids around what dad is trying to work on. Like I'm trying to work at these things. I know I'm struggling at these things. I want to be a great dad to you guys. And so to do that just empowers and has beautiful conversations where they give me feedback. They tell me when I'm doing better. They tell me when I'm not doing better. And then they get to talk about what they're working at and how they're trying to improve.
Modeling a good behavior or a good approach to life, and you are showing transparency, and then, it trickles down from there. If I have somebody on that talks about the swing or the pitching delivery or mechanics or something of that sort, those are helpful, of course, but those cannot be taken and transferred to any other part of life. So if you learn how to teach a kid a better baseball swing or a better jump shot or what have you, or a better wrist shot in hockey, that ability to coach that up is not transferable. It's not usable anywhere else in life, except probably with that kid or maybe a group of kids at practice, at the game, and that's it. You can't take it home with you. You can't use it anywhere else. What we're talking about here, as you alluded to, JP, a second ago, is this stuff is usable almost all day long, whether it's in our job, our business, parenting, coaching, and you could even say friendships too. This topic has so much bang for your buck. So if you're listening, you're like, wow, this is great. I'm a youth coach. I'm coming to this 80-20 baseball podcast to listen about youth coaching, be a better youth coach. But I do get a lot of emails, JP. I do. Over the years, I've gotten a lot of emails and it'll say, hey, thanks for this. Thanks for helping me be a better coach. But also, thank you for helping me be a better person, a better parent. And so that's always good. But it's never regarding, teaching them how to run a better drill. It's about this sort of thing. So With that said, JP, let's dive into the parent. Can you share a story about how you helped a coach resolve? Let me back up. Let's go into the topic of coaches working cohesively with parents, turning parents, as you say, into allies and not opponents. And the question here is, can you share a story about how you helped a coach resolve an issue with a difficult parent?
Yeah, I would really want to share two, because I think the more powerful one is how I've helped coaches to eliminate a lot of parent problems that would have come up otherwise. I think that's the more upstream thing. And then I'll share a downstream one. I mean, just the whole book is largely based on the upstream approach that we're going to engage parents. There's ideas in there about how we build relationships, to how we have our initial conversations, just learning their name, learning a little bit about them as a person, not just as Johnny's mom or dad, about where they work, what they do, what their experience. Do they play baseball, right? Do they love baseball? Why do they want their kid to play baseball? What are their hopes for their child playing? What experience do they want them to have? What are their concerns for their child outside of baseball? Like, what are their biggest concerns in life? So asking great questions to get to know them, to know about what's important to them. Also being transparent. Every level is different. Some levels, your youth level, everyone's playing equal time. The focus is on development. As you move up, it might be more competitive based. Playing time is decided a little bit differently. We need to communicate two things. One is our leadership philosophy. Why do we coach? Tell that story, right? But also how we plan to build the culture, what our process is for that. So, we're learning about the parents, we're communicating. We're also saying, hey, these are conversations that I want to have. It's not just conversations that I don't want to have. I want to know when you see something at home with your kid. Like, I want to know when there's trouble here or there, or what you're seeing here. Like, these are conversations I need to have so I can better support your son. So building that partnership from day one, and just kind of through a relationship, through clear communication around what your role is and what you're trying to do within the program. And so many other things that we've done with coaches to actually involve them in practices. We've got Division I college coaches that are involving parents in practices down to, I ran a parent practice with the athletes for my daughter's under-8s team the other day. And, the parents end up playing a game against the kids, and the kids were taking their parents through some drills and things like that. So the more we can bring parents into the equation and be part of the experience, builds that partnership. And when we just do that, there's a lot of issues that oftentimes that nasty parent email, the nasty parent text, that conflict that just never gets to that point, because the parent feels safe to go, hey, I saw you did something the other day, and this is what I noticed. And it's like, no, that's not actually what happened. And you're able to clarify a misperception. Or there's an issue with a player who's really struggling emotionally with their role and stuff like that. They're able to see, actually, you do care about them. You're not just dropping them from the lineup without care, because you're able to have that conversation. So many issues have been eliminated because of that. On the other side of that, back to your point of what's an issue, or your question of what's a time with a coach where I was able to help them resolve an issue. I had a young coach, 28, first-time head coach, high school, high exposure, and the parents called a meeting with the administrator, the principal, athletic director, and him. And he sat down with the two parents and these two twins of the team that weren't playing that much. And he listened to the parents' concerns. Parents were really nasty to him. He listened. He said, okay, this is what I'm actually hearing. You're really frustrated because your sons have worked really hard and they're seniors in this program. I've come in here and I'm not starting them, and you think they should be starting because they paid their dues. Dad's like, yeah, well, this is my perspective on your sons. This is what I'm seeing. This is what we observed with their work ethic. And so because of that, they're not meeting our cultural standards. They're not going to play until they fix those things. And so he was really firm and convicted. And then he said, now, what can we do to better support your sons in the role they're currently in? And then in that situation there, the dad was able to kind of communicate kind of loosely what he could do. They tried to work through that situation. The parents ended up deciding this program isn't for us. They took the kids out. But that coach, the issue was eliminated. And it wasn't like this perfectly peaceful resolution, but it was this one where those parents recognized that this wasn't the program for us. And that's sometimes what we got to be as far as coaches too. We want to have an inclusive program with parents. We want to partner. We want to work with them, but we also got to know that this is what we're about. And we're not willing to sacrifice our culture to be beholden to some parents and their desires and their needs for their own, to be filled with their own child. So it's the right balance of partnership, but also boundaries.
All right, that wraps up part 2 of our interview with Coach JP. If you haven't already gone out and looked into getting a hold of his books, I'm not making any money off recommending these books, but I highly recommend you go get, at a minimum, the Culture System book, if not all 3 of his books. These topics are so amazing in terms of how much they impact our lives and can help us throughout our day. These particular topics that we're discussing can help us be better our day. Can't say that about many topics, many things that we learn. Those things can help us, but more acutely, specific situations, specific areas, specific parts of our life. But what JP has been discussing in the interview can help us throughout our entire life. So next week, we'll finish strong with part 3 of the interview, the third and final part of our interview with JP. Until then, take care of that health, that foundation. Let's be strong for our families, be there for our close friends, and let's go make the baseball community, the youth baseball community, a much better place. And until next week, adios.
This has been the 80-20 Baseball Masterclass. Take it to the field.